Christmas dinner turned into a nightmare when my dad stood up, pointed at me, and announced to our entire family that I was a leech who couldn't stay in his house past New Year's. 28 years old, recently laid off from my marketing job, and still recovering from my divorce, I thought I had found safety at home. But as my stepmom, Carol, smirked and my younger brother, Jake, avoided eye contact, I realized this wasn't about money at all. This was about something much darker. The whole mess started 3 months earlier when I lost my job at a tech startup in downtown Denver. The company downsized, and even though I had stellar performance reviews, I was among the 30 employees let go. At the same time, my divorce from Ryan was getting uglier by the day. He had cheated with his coworker, and now he was fighting me for every asset we had accumulated during our 5-year marriage. Moving back to Dad's house in suburban Lakewood seemed like the logical choice. I had been contributing what I could from my unemployment benefits, about $400 a month toward groceries and utilities. It wasn't much, but I figured it showed I wasn't just freeloading while I job hunted and dealt with my divorce proceedings. The house felt different than when I was growing up. Dad had married Carol 5 years ago, 2 years after Mom died from cancer. Carol brought her own energy to the place, redecorating everything and making it clear this was her domain now. My 16-year-old half-brother Jake tried to bridge the gap between the old family dynamics and the new reality, but even he seemed to walk on eggshells around Carol sometimes. Christmas dinner should have been a celebration. Carol's sister Patricia and her husband Mark brought their twin daughters Lucy and Emma, who were 8 years old and full of excitement about their new toys. The dining room table was set with Mom's good china, which always made me feel both comforted and sad. Dad carved the turkey while Carol directed everyone to their assigned seats, like she was orchestrating a business meeting. Everything seemed normal until we finished the main course. I was helping clear plates when Dad suddenly became quiet and distant. Carol kept giving him meaningful looks, and Patricia seemed unusually tense. Even Mark, who usually kept everyone laughing with his stories from his job at the fire department, became subdued. When Carol brought out her famous apple pie, Dad stood up abruptly. His face was stern, and he had that look he used to get when he was about to deliver bad news about grades or curfew violations. "Tammy, you're 28 years old. You can't keep living off other people. Carol and I have discussed this, and you need to be out by January 1st. The words hit me like a physical blow. The conversation at the table stopped completely. Lucy and Emma looked confused, sensing the adult tension but not understanding it. Patricia stared at her plate, and Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Dad, what are you talking about? I've been contributing what I can, and I'm actively job hunting. I just need a little more time to get back on my feet." Carol immediately jumped in with fake sympathy dripping from her voice. "Honey, we understand you're going through a difficult time, but you never help with household expenses. We've been carrying the full burden of mortgage, utilities, and groceries for months now." That was a complete lie. I had been giving them money regularly, and I had documentation to prove it. I pulled out my phone to show them my bank records, but Dad waved his hand dismissively. "This isn't a negotiation, Tammy. Carol and I have made our decision. We've already converted your childhood bedroom into Carol's craft room. She needs space for her quilting projects." Jake looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. He caught my eye for just a second, and I saw something there that looked like guilt mixed with fear. Patricia finally spoke up, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe we should talk about this privately after dinner." But Carol wasn't having it. "No, Patricia. This affects the whole family. Tammy needs to understand that she can't just drift through life expecting everyone else to take care of her responsibilities." The injustice of her words made my chest tight with anger. I had been working since I was 15, put myself through college with minimal help from Dad, and had been completely self-sufficient until my recent setbacks. Being temporarily vulnerable didn't make me a leech. Then came the moment that changed everything. During the heated exchange, Carol made a crucial mistake. "We need the space anyway because Brandon is getting out of rehab next week and needs somewhere stable to stay while he gets back on his feet." The table went silent. This was the first time I had ever heard Carol mention having a son named Brandon. In 5 years of marriage to my dad, she had never once mentioned having an adult child from a previous relationship. Dad's face turned red and he shot Carol a warning look. Carol, that's not relevant right now. But I pressed the issue. Who is Brandon you've never mentioned having a son? Carol backpedaled quickly, but the damage was done. That's family business, Tammy. The point is, we need you to respect our decision and make arrangements to leave. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't about money or space or me being a burden. They had been planning this all along, waiting for the right moment to push me out so Carol's son could move in. I had been manipulated and lied to by my own father. Jake looked sick. Patricia and Mark were clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. Lucy and Emma were now openly staring, trying to understand why the adults were upset. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking with a combination of anger and heartbreak. I see what this is really about now. You've been planning this, haven't you? This whole setup, this dinner, this announcement in front of everyone. You wanted witnesses to make it seem official. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes. Carol crossed her arms defensively. Don't be dramatic, Tammy. We're just asking you to take responsibility for your own life. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet and found my car keys in my purse. The snow was coming down hard outside, and I knew driving would be dangerous, but I couldn't stay in that house another minute. Jake, I'm sorry you had to see this. Patricia, Mark, thank you for the years of including me in family gatherings. Dad, when you figure out what Carol has really gotten you into, you know where to find me. I walked out into the December night, questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. As I drove carefully through the snow toward my best friend Sarah's apartment across town, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If they could lie about something this big, what else had they been hiding? Sarah took one look at my face when she opened her apartment door and immediately pulled me inside. Her cozy living room felt like a sanctuary compared to the hostile environment I had just escaped. She made hot chocolate while I explained what had happened at dinner, and with each detail, her expression grew more concerned. I knew something was off about Carol. Sarah said, settling beside me on her overstuffed couch. Remember when we ran into her at Target last month? She acted so weird when she saw us together, like she didn't want you to have friends or something. Sarah suggested we do some research while I was still processing the shock. She opened her laptop and we started searching for information about Carol's background. What we found made my stomach drop. Brandon Thompson had multiple arrests for drug possession, theft, and assault over the past 10 years. His most recent conviction was for breaking into houses to steal prescription medications, which had landed him in a state rehabilitation facility. The mug shots showed a thin man with hollow eyes and facial tattoos that looked like they had been done in prison. Tammy, look at this, Sarah said, pointing to a news article from 6 months ago. Brandon was arrested with 3 other people for running a prescription drug ring. They were targeting elderly residents in assisted living facilities. I stared at the screen, trying to process that my father was about to welcome this person into his home, into Jake's home. Either Dad had no idea about Brandon's criminal history, or Carol had convinced him it didn't matter. The next morning, I drove back to Dad's house while he and Carol were at their usual Sunday church service. I needed to pack my belongings, but I also wanted to look around and see if there were other signs of deception I had missed. In the garage, I found stacks of boxes with my name written on them in Carol's handwriting. My childhood books, photo albums, stuffed animals, and mementos from high school were already packed away. Some of the boxes had dates from 3 weeks ago, proving this eviction had been planned long before Christmas dinner. But the real discovery came when I went inside to pack my clothes. On the kitchen counter was a pile of mail, and I recognized several envelopes addressed to me. Carol had been intercepting my correspondence, including responses from companies where I had applied for jobs. One envelope from Peterson and Associates, a marketing firm where I had interviewed in November, was already opened. Inside was a letter asking me to schedule a second interview and stating that they had been trying to reach me for 2 weeks. Carol had hidden this from me, sabotaging my job search. Jake came home early from church claiming he felt sick. When he saw me going through the mail, he looked around nervously to make sure we were alone. "Tammy, I need to tell you something, but you can't let Dad and Carol know I said anything." He led me to his bedroom and closed the door. From his backpack, he pulled out several bank statements that he said he had accidentally seen when Carol asked him to organize some paperwork. "Dad has been cashing your unemployment checks that come to this address. Look at these deposits." The statements showed regular deposits of my unemployment benefits going into Dad's account totaling about $1,200 over the past 3 months. While I had been carefully budgeting my reduced income and contributing what I could to household expenses, Dad had been stealing money that legally belonged to me. "There's more," Jake continued. "I heard Carol on the phone with her sister Patricia last week. She's been telling everyone in the family that you're unstable and taking advantage of Dad's kindness. She said you refuse to get a job and spend all day watching TV. Jake's revelations painted a picture of systematic manipulation that went far beyond just wanting me out of the house. Carol had been actively sabotaging my attempts to rebuild my life while simultaneously destroying my reputation with extended family members. When Dad and Carol returned from church, they found me packing in my old bedroom, which had indeed been converted into Carol's craft space. Fabric quilting supplies and a new sewing machine had replaced my childhood furniture. "Good, you're being reasonable about this," Carol said when she saw my suitcases. But I wasn't feeling reasonable at all. I was feeling angry and betrayed and ready for answers. "I want to know about the unemployment checks, Dad, the ones you've been cashing without my knowledge." Dad's face went white, then red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "And I want to know about the job interview letters you intercepted Carol." Carol immediately became defensive and aggressive. "You're being paranoid, Tammy. Nobody intercepted anything." Jake appeared in the doorway holding the bank statements. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "I showed her the paperwork, Dad. She knows about the checks." Dad exploded at Jake for what he called betraying family loyalty. Carol threatened to call the police if I didn't leave immediately. But something had shifted in me during the past 24 hours. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was determined to fight back. "You can call whoever you want, Carol. But first, you're going to explain to me why you've been systematically sabotaging my life while stealing my money. And Dad, you're going to explain how you justified cashing checks that weren't addressed to you." Carol's mask of fake sweetness slipped completely. Her voice became cold and calculating. "This is my house now, Tammy. You don't get to make demands here. Your father chose me, and you need to respect that." But Jake's courage in speaking up had changed the dynamic. For the first time, I wasn't facing this alone. And I was starting to realize that if Carol could orchestrate this level of deception, there might be even more that I didn't know about yet. As I finished packing my belongings, I made a decision. I wasn't going to just disappear quietly and let Carol control the narrative about why I left. I was going to find out exactly what she had been hiding, and I was going to make sure Dad understood what he had gotten himself into. The war was just beginning, and I intended to win. Sarah's spare bedroom became my base of operations for the next few days. While she went to work at the dental office where she was a hygienist, I spent my time methodically building a case against Carol and planning my counterattack. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about protecting Jake and helping Dad see the truth before it was too late. My first stop was the unemployment office downtown. I filed a formal complaint about the stolen checks providing documentation of Dad's unauthorized access to my benefits. The caseworker, a middle-aged woman named Beverly, took the situation seriously and explained that cashing someone else's government benefits constituted federal mail fraud. "This isn't just about the money," Beverly explained. "It's about identity theft and interfering with federal programs. The person who did this could face serious criminal charges." She helped me request that all future correspondence be sent to Sarah's address and assured me that an investigation would begin immediately. Having official documentation of the theft felt like my first real victory in this fight. Next, I contacted Linda Morrison, the attorney who had handled my divorce from Ryan. Linda had always been straightforward and honest qualities I desperately needed right now. When I explained the situation, she asked me to bring all my documentation to her office for a consultation. Linda's office overlooked the downtown Denver skyline, and sitting in her conference room made me feel like I was finally taking control of my situation. She reviewed the bank statements Jake had provided the intercepted mail and the timeline of events leading up to Christmas dinner. "Tammy, you have grounds for several different charges here. The unemployment theft is federal mail fraud. The intercepted job correspondence could be considered harassment and interference with your livelihood. If Carol has been spreading false information about you to damage your reputation, that could be defamation." She leaned back in her chair and studied the documents. "But before we go nuclear with criminal charges, I think we should try a more strategic approach. Sometimes the threat of legal action is more effective than actually filing charges, especially if the goal is to repair family relationships." Linda advised me to continue documenting everything and gathering more evidence. She suspected that if Carol was capable of this level of manipulation, there were probably other deceptions we hadn't discovered yet. That afternoon, Jake texted me asking to meet at a diner near his high school. He looked nervous when he arrived, constantly checking over his shoulder like he expected Dad or Carol to appear. "I've been thinking about what you said about there being more we don't know." He began sliding into the booth across from me. So I started paying more attention to Carol's phone calls and conversations. What Jake had discovered was far more extensive than I had imagined. Carol had been systematically isolating Dad from his side of the family by spreading lies and creating conflicts. She told Aunt Michelle that Dad was embarrassed by her weight gain and didn't want her visiting anymore. She convinced Uncle David that Dad thought his political opinions were ignorant and preferred to avoid family debates. "She's been doing this for years, Tammy. Remember how we used to have big family gatherings for holidays? Carol always had some excuse for why this person or that person couldn't come. But it turns out she was telling everyone different stories about why they weren't welcome." Jake pulled out his phone and showed me text messages between Carol and her sister Patricia. They had been coordinating the Christmas dinner confrontation for weeks, planning exactly what to say and how to make it look like Dad's decision rather than Carol's manipulation. But the most shocking revelation was about Carol's son, Brandon. According to Jake's research and overheard conversations, Brandon wasn't just getting out of rehab. He was running from drug dealers who claimed he owed them money, and he had been using Carol's previous address to receive packages and conduct business that she knew was illegal. Carol changed her address to Dad's house 6 months ago, and Brandon has been having mail sent here ever since. There are packages that come for him sometimes, and Carol always makes sure she's the one who gets the mail. Jake showed me photos he had secretly taken of suspicious packages addressed to Brandon Thompson at Dad's address. If Carol was helping her son conduct criminal business from Dad's house, it could implicate Dad in whatever Brandon was involved in. "Jake, this is serious. If your dad gets connected to drug trafficking or money laundering, he could lose his job, his house, everything." Jake nodded miserably. "I know. I've been trying to figure out how to tell him without making things worse. Carol has him so twisted around that he doesn't listen to anything that sounds like criticism of her." We spent the next hour developing a plan. Jake would continue gathering information and documenting Carol's activities. I would work with my attorney to prepare a comprehensive case that showed the full scope of Carol's manipulation. Then we would present everything to Dad at once, giving him a chance to make things right before involving law enforcement. When I got back to Sarah's apartment that evening, I had a missed call from Peterson and Associates, the marketing firm, whose correspondence Carol had intercepted. I called them back immediately and spoke with the hiring manager, Jennifer Walsh. "Ms. Davis, we've been trying to reach you for weeks. We were very impressed with your interview and wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting. We sent several emails and left messages, but never heard back." I explained that there had been issues with my mail and contact information, and Jennifer was understanding about rescheduling. She offered me an interview slot for the following Tuesday, which felt like another piece of my life falling back into place. That night, lying on Sarah's couch and looking at the city lights through her living room window, I realized something important had shifted in me. 24 hours earlier, I had felt like a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Now I felt like a strategic planner who was methodically solving problems and building toward a solution. Carol had underestimated me. She had assumed I would quietly disappear and let her control the narrative about why I left. Instead, I was building a case that would expose her manipulation and protect the people I cared about. The war was far from over, but for the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt like I was winning. The next morning, I decided to reach out to Dad's sister, Michelle, who lived about an hour north in Fort Collins. Carol had always claimed that Aunt Michelle was too busy with her own family to maintain close relationships, but Jake's revelations made me suspect there was more to the story. Michelle answered her phone on the second ring, and her voice immediately warmed when she realized it was me. "Tammy, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up with everything?" That was an interesting response. I had expected her to ask about Christmas or my living situation, but she seemed to already know something was wrong. "What do you mean by everything Aunt Michelle?" There was a pause before she responded. "Well, Carol called me last week and said you were having some kind of mental health crisis and that your dad was worried about you living there. She made it sound quite serious." Another lie. Carol had been preemptively destroying my reputation with family members, creating a narrative that would make me look unstable if I tried to defend myself. I explained what had really happened at Christmas dinner, and Michelle became increasingly upset as I shared the details. She revealed that Carol had been systematically cutting her out of Dad's life for the past 2 years with similar tactics. "Carol told your father that I was jealous of their marriage and that I made inappropriate comments about their relationship. She said I was trying to cause problems and that it would be better if I didn't visit as often." Michelle had accepted this distance, reluctantly not wanting to cause conflict for Dad, but she had noticed that he seemed increasingly isolated and that his personality had become more aggressive and defensive since marrying Carol. "Your father used to call me every week just to chat. We've always been close since we lost our parents, but over the past year, our conversations became shorter and more tense. Carol was usually in the background, and I could tell she was listening to everything." Michelle agreed to help expose Carol's manipulation. As Dad's older sister and someone he had always respected, her testimony about Carol's lies would carry significant weight. We arranged to meet that weekend to coordinate our approach. The job interview at Peterson & Associates went even better than I had hoped. Jennifer Walsh and the marketing director Stephen Chen were impressed with my experience and my ideas for their upcoming campaigns. The position offered a higher salary than my previous job and better benefits, which would allow me to secure a nice apartment and rebuild my financial independence. "We'd like to offer you the position," Jennifer said at the end of our meeting. "When would you be able to start?" "January 8th. I replied, feeling a surge of confidence and vindication. Despite Carol's attempts to sabotage my job search, I was landing on my feet professionally. With a job offer in hand, I was able to secure an apartment lease for February 1st. The complex was in a trendy area of downtown Denver, with mountain views and access to hiking trails. It felt like a fresh start and a significant upgrade from the toxic environment I had been living in. That evening, Jake called with urgent information. He had been monitoring Carol's activities more closely and had discovered something alarming through her social media posts and phone conversations. "Brandon isn't just a recovering addict, Tammy. He's involved with some really dangerous people." Jake had found photos on Brandon's social media accounts showing him with known drug dealers who had been featured in local news stories. One photo showed Brandon at Carol's previous apartment, with men who were later arrested for running a methamphetamine distribution network. Carol knows about this. I heard her talking to Brandon on the phone yesterday, coaching him on what to say to Dad when he arrives. She told him to act like he's been sober for months and that he just needs a place to get back on his feet. But there was more. Carol had been using Dad's address to receive packages for Brandon since she moved in. Some of these packages had come from addresses that Jake had cross-referenced with locations mentioned in police reports about drug trafficking. If the police ever raid the house looking for Brandon's operation, Dad could be charged as an accessory, just for letting it happen on his property. This revelation elevated the stakes significantly. This wasn't just about family drama or hurt feelings anymore. Dad's freedom and financial security were at risk if he continued to be manipulated by Carol. I called Linda Morrison and scheduled an emergency meeting to review the new evidence. She examined the photos, social media posts, and package delivery records that Jake had documented. "This is extremely serious," Linda said. "If your father allows Brandon to establish residence at his house while knowing about these criminal connections, he could face federal charges for harboring a fugitive or facilitating drug trafficking." Linda advised that we needed to present this information to Dad immediately before Brandon arrived and before Dad could claim ignorance about the criminal activities. She helped me prepare a comprehensive evidence package that laid out Carol's deceptions, the financial theft, and the potential criminal liability Dad faced. Meanwhile, Jake was gathering even more evidence. He had started secretly recording conversations between Carol and her sister Patricia, capturing Carol's true opinions about Dad and her real motivations for the marriage. In one particularly damaging recording, Carol laughed about how easily manipulated Dad was and how she had been able to control his relationships with his family and friends. She bragged about isolating him from people who might question her influence and admitted that she married him primarily for financial security. "The best part is he thinks all these decisions are his idea," Carol's voice said on Jake's recording. "I just plant the suggestions and let him think he's being the strong head of household." Uncle Michael, Michelle's husband, reached out to me after Michelle filled him in on the situation. He revealed that Carol had tried to borrow money from them 6 months earlier, claiming that Dad needed help with unexpected medical expenses. When they offered to call Dad directly to discuss it, Carol quickly backtracked and said the situation had been resolved. "We thought it was strange that your dad would need money without asking us himself," Michael explained. "He's always been proud about his financial independence, but Carol made it sound urgent and we were prepared to help if needed." The pattern of deception was becoming clear. Carol had been running multiple schemes to extract money and resources from Dad and his family, while systematically isolating him from anyone who might recognize her manipulation tactics. As New Year's Eve approached, our intelligence network had gathered substantial evidence of Carol's criminal connections, financial fraud, and systematic manipulation. Jake's recordings provided proof of her real motivations and attitudes. Linda's legal analysis showed grounds for multiple criminal charges. Michelle's testimony documented the family isolation tactics. But most importantly, we had discovered that Brandon was expected to arrive on New Year's Eve with several associates who were connected to drug trafficking operations. If we didn't act before then, Dad could find himself in legal jeopardy that would be difficult to escape. The time for strategic planning was ending. The time for direct confrontation was about to begin. On December 30th, I arranged to meet Dad at a neutral location where we could talk without Carol's interference. I chose Grind Coffee House near downtown Denver, a place where Dad and I used to meet when I was in college and needed advice about classes or internships. The familiar setting felt appropriate for what I hoped would be a conversation that restored our relationship. Linda Morrison agreed to accompany me as both legal counsel and a witness to whatever Dad's response might be. I brought a comprehensive folder containing all the evidence we had gathered: bank statements showing the stolen unemployment checks, photos of intercepted mail recordings of Carol's manipulative conversations, and documentation of Brandon's criminal background. Dad arrived 15 minutes late, looking agitated and defensive. When he saw Linda sitting with me, his expression darkened. "What is this, some kind of ambush? I thought you wanted to talk about working things out." "I do want to work things out, Dad, but first you need to see what's really been happening in your house." I started with the financial evidence showing him the bank statements that proved he had been cashing my unemployment checks. Dad's initial response was complete denial, claiming the paperwork must be falsified or that there was some misunderstanding with the Postal Service. "Dad, these are official bank records. Your signature is on the deposit slips. You took $1,200 that belonged to me while telling everyone I wasn't contributing to household expenses." Linda spoke up to explain the legal implications. Mr. Davis cashing someone else's government benefits constitutes federal mail fraud. The penalties can include substantial fines and prison time. Dad shifted uncomfortably but maintained his defensive posture. Carol handles most of our financial paperwork. If there was some mistake with the mail, it wasn't intentional. Next, I showed him the evidence of intercepted job correspondence, including the letter from Peterson and Associates that could have led to employment weeks earlier. Dad seemed genuinely surprised by this information, suggesting that Carol had hidden her sabotage of my job search even from him. "Why would Carol do something like that?" he asked, and for the first time I heard doubt in his voice. "That's what I want to know too, Dad, but there's more you need to hear." I played Jake's audio recordings on my phone. Dad's face went through several changes as he heard Carol talking to her sister about manipulating him and bragging about how easily she could control his decisions. The recording of Carol calling him easily manipulated and laughing about isolating him from his family hit him like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair staring at the coffee shop table, processing the reality that his wife had been mocking him behind his back for years. "She said I was desperate." He whispered more to himself than to us. Linda seized the moment to present the most serious evidence. "Mr. Davis, there's something else you need to know about your stepson, Brandon, and the legal liability you could face by allowing him to live in your house." She spread out the photos and police reports documenting Brandon's criminal connections and Carol's involvement in using Dad's address for suspicious package deliveries. "Your house is being used as a mailing address for people connected to drug trafficking operations. If Brandon arrives with his associates and continues using your property for criminal activities, you could be charged as an accessory." Dad stared at the evidence in shock. The photos clearly showed Brandon with people who had been arrested for serious drug crimes. The package delivery records showed a pattern of suspicious activity that had been going on for months without Dad's knowledge. "I don't understand," Dad said quietly. "Carol told me Brandon was a recovering addict who needed family support to stay clean. She said he had been sober for 6 months and just needed a stable environment. Dad, Brandon is expected to arrive tomorrow night with criminal associates. Carol has been planning this for weeks while lying to you about his situation. If you let him establish residence at your house, you could lose everything." Linda explained the immediate legal steps Dad needed to take to protect himself. He had until midnight to choose between cutting ties with Carol or potentially facing criminal charges as an accessory to whatever Brandon and his associates were planning. "We can contact the police through my office and arrange for cooperation in any investigation. But that requires your full honesty about what Carol has been doing and your willingness to prevent Brandon from using your property." The emotional weight of the evidence was finally breaking through Dad's defensive walls. He put his head in his hands and sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "I felt guilty about the divorce from Jake's mother. I thought I owed it to Jake to try to make this new family work. Carol seemed to understand that and supported my relationship with him." Dad admitted that he had been miserable for months, but felt trapped by Carol's threats to leave and take Jake with her. She had convinced him that his family thought he was a failure and that she was the only person who truly understood his struggles. "I knew something was wrong, but every time I questioned her about anything, she made me feel like I was being paranoid or unreasonable. She said I was pushing away the only person who really cared about me." Linda explained that manipulation victims often struggle to recognize abuse because it happens gradually and systematically. The important thing now is that you're willing to see the truth and take action to protect yourself and Jake. Dad agreed to return home with us to confront Carol before Brandon arrived. The drive to the house felt tense but purposeful. For the first time in weeks, I felt like Dad and I were on the same side instead of opponents. When we arrived, Jake met us at the door with relief visible on his face. Carol was in the kitchen, apparently preparing for Brandon's arrival by stocking the refrigerator and setting up the craft room as a temporary bedroom. "Robert, what is she doing here?" Carol demanded when she saw me walk in with Dad and Linda. "I thought we agreed that Tammy needed to respect our boundaries." Dad's demeanor was completely different than it had been at Christmas dinner. Instead of being defensive and hostile, he was calm and determined. Carol, we need to talk about Brandon's situation and about some financial issues that have come up. I presented the evidence systematically while Linda documented Carol's responses. When confronted with the recordings of her manipulative conversations, Carol immediately became aggressive and threatening. "You can't use those recordings in court. Jake made them without my permission. That's illegal." Linda corrected her. "Actually, Colorado is a one-party consent state. Jake was party to the conversation, so the recordings are perfectly legal." When we showed Carol the evidence of Brandon's criminal connections, her mask slipped completely. She stopped denying the charges and began threatening to destroy Dad's life if he didn't support her family. "You think you can just throw me out after everything I've done for you? I know things about you that would ruin your reputation at work and in this community." But her final desperate gambit was the most shocking revelation of all. Carol admitted that she had been secretly recording conversations and taking photos to build a false case, claiming that Dad had been abusing Jake. "I have hours of recordings and documentation that would convince any court that Jake isn't safe in this house. If you try to leave me or kick Brandon out, I'll destroy both of you." The room went silent. Jake looked terrified, and Dad appeared to be processing the full scope of how extensively he had been manipulated and threatened. Linda immediately advised that Carol's admission to creating false evidence constituted criminal conspiracy and witness tampering. "Ms. Thompson, you've just confessed to multiple felonies in front of witnesses." Carol realized she had revealed too much and tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Her desperation had exposed the full extent of her criminal planning, and everyone in the room understood that she was willing to destroy innocent people to protect her schemes. Dad looked at Carol with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. "Get out of my house. Tonight. Before Brandon arrives and before I change my mind about pressing charges." But Carol wasn't finished fighting. Her final words as she gathered her belongings revealed the depth of her manipulation. "You'll never prove any of this, Robert. And when Brandon gets here tomorrow, you'll realize you need me more than you think." As Carol stormed out, I realized that we had won this battle, but the war wasn't over yet. Brandon was still expected to arrive, and Carol's threats suggested she had backup plans we hadn't discovered yet. Carol's departure from the house felt like the end of a siege, but Linda warned us that desperate people often escalate their tactics when cornered. She advised Dad to obtain an emergency restraining order against Brandon and to contact the police about Carol's criminal activities before she could implement whatever revenge plans she might have. Despite being ordered to leave, Carol refused to go quietly. She barricaded herself in the master bedroom and began making phone calls, presumably to Brandon and her criminal associates. Through the closed door, we could hear her voice becoming increasingly agitated as she realized her schemes were unraveling. Linda called the police from her cell phone, explaining that we had evidence of ongoing criminal activity and needed immediate assistance. She also contacted a judge she knew personally to request an emergency restraining order against Brandon based on his criminal history and the threat he posed to the household. When Carol finally emerged from the bedroom with her suitcases, her demeanor had changed from desperate to coldly calculating. "You think this is over, but you have no idea what you've started. Brandon will be here tomorrow whether you want him or not, and he won't come alone." Dad tried to maintain his resolve, but I could see that Carol's threats were affecting him. "Carol, just leave peacefully. You don't need to make this worse than it already is." "Worse, Robert, you haven't seen worse yet. I've been protecting you from worse for 5 years." Linda stepped forward with legal paperwork. "Ms. Thompson, you're being served with a restraining order. If you or Brandon attempt to contact Mr. Davis or enter this property, you'll be arrested immediately." Carol laughed bitterly as she looked at the legal documents. "A piece of paper won't stop what's coming. You people have no idea who you're dealing with." After Carol finally left, the house felt eerily quiet. Jake emerged from his room where he had been hiding during the confrontation, looking relieved, but still scared about what might happen next. "Is it really over?" he asked. Linda shook her head. "This is just the beginning of the legal process. Carol's threats suggest she may try to retaliate, and Brandon is still expected to arrive tomorrow night. We need to be prepared for escalation. That evening, the police arrived to take our statements and review the evidence we had gathered. Detective Sarah Martinez was thorough and professional, documenting everything from the financial fraud to the criminal conspiracy charges that Carol could face. Based on what you've shown me, we have grounds for multiple felony charges, Detective Martinez explained. The unemployment fraud, mail theft conspiracy, and threats of false imprisonment are all serious crimes. The detective also confirmed that Brandon Thompson was indeed a person of interest in several ongoing drug investigations. His expected arrival at Dad's house had potentially saved Dad from unwitting involvement in criminal activities that could have destroyed his life. Mr. Davis, by cooperating with this investigation, you're protecting yourself from charges that could have included harboring fugitives and facilitating drug trafficking. You made the right choice. The next day, New Year's Eve, began quietly. Dad was processing everything that had happened, alternating between anger at being manipulated and guilt for not recognizing Carol's deception sooner. Jake was relieved, but anxious about the possibility of Brandon showing up despite the restraining order. I spent the morning helping Dad change locks on the house and securing important documents in a safe deposit box at his bank. Linda had advised that Carol might try to return when she thought no one was home, either to retrieve items or to plant evidence for future legal battles. Around noon, Detective Martinez called with an update that changed everything. The police had been monitoring known criminal associates of Brandon Thompson, and their surveillance had led to multiple arrests the night before. Brandon Thompson was arrested at 2 a.m. along with 3 associates for possession of methamphetamine with intent to distribute, Detective Martinez explained. They were found with drugs, weapons, and stolen property in a hotel room across town. The detective revealed that Brandon's arrest had led to the discovery of a larger criminal network that Carol had been involved with for years. Her previous apartment had been used as a distribution center, and she had been providing addresses and communication services for drug dealers in exchange for money. Ms. Thompson wasn't just enabling her son's addiction, she was an active participant in criminal enterprise. Her marriage to your father appears to have been motivated primarily by the need for a legitimate address to continue these activities. But the most shocking revelation came from Brandon's confession during questioning. Under pressure from drug charges that could result in decades in prison, Brandon had revealed the full scope of Carol's criminal activities and her plans for revenge against Dad. According to Brandon, Carol has been embezzling money from your father's business accounts for months. She opened credit cards in his name to fund Brandon's legal troubles and drug debts. The total financial damage appears to exceed $15,000. Detective Martinez also revealed that Carol had attempted to transfer the deed of Dad's house into her name through forged documents. If her plan had succeeded, she could have sold the property and disappeared with the proceeds while leaving Dad homeless and liable for Brandon's debts. She also admitted to planning false charges against Mr. Davis involving alleged child abuse. She had been documenting fake evidence for months, preparing to destroy his reputation and gain custody of Jake if her other schemes failed. The scope of Carol's deception was staggering. She hadn't just been a manipulative wife. She'd been running a systematic criminal enterprise designed to steal Dad's entire life while using his home as a base for drug trafficking operations. Dad was devastated as he absorbed the reality of how completely he'd been used and manipulated. 5 years of my life and none of it was real. She never loved me at all. Jake felt guilty for not speaking up sooner about the suspicious activities he had observed, but Linda reassured him that his courage in finally telling the truth had saved Dad from potential criminal charges and financial ruin. If you hadn't provided those recordings and documentation, your father could have been charged as an accessory to drug trafficking when Brandon arrived. You probably saved his freedom and his future. As evening approached on New Year's Eve, police officers arrived to provide additional security. Carol's criminal associates were still at large, and Detective Martinez wasn't taking any chances with our safety. But instead of violence or retaliation, we received news that Carol had been arrested while attempting to flee the state. She was found at Denver International Airport with false identification documents and a significant amount of cash that appeared to be proceeds from her criminal activities. She's being charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and attempting to flee prosecution, Detective Martinez informed us. Based on the evidence and her criminal history, she's unlikely to make bail. As midnight approached and fireworks began lighting up the Denver skyline, our family was finally safe from Carol's manipulation and threats. The past week had been emotionally exhausting, but we had emerged stronger and more united than we had been in years. Dad apologized repeatedly to both Jake and me for allowing Carol to manipulate him and for not recognizing the damage she was causing to our family relationships. Jake forgave him immediately, just grateful to have the toxic influence removed from their home. The transformation in our family dynamic was immediate and profound. Without Carol's constant manipulation and control, Dad returned to being the thoughtful, caring person I remembered from my childhood. Jake flourished without the fear and tension that had dominated his home environment for years. Justice was being served systematically. Carol faced decades in prison for her crimes. Brandon was looking at serious drug trafficking charges. The money stolen from Dad and me was being recovered through asset forfeiture proceedings. But more importantly, our family was healing. The lies that had divided us were replaced with honesty and mutual support. The manipulation that had turned us against each other was replaced with genuine love and respect. As we watched the New Year's fireworks from Dad's backyard, I realized that sometimes the worst experiences in life can lead to the best outcomes when we have the courage to fight for the truth and stand up for the people we love. 6 months later, my life had been completely transformed in ways I never could have imagined during that horrible Christmas dinner. The job at Peterson & Associates had exceeded my expectations, and I had been promoted to senior marketing specialist after developing several successful campaigns that brought in new clients. My salary increase allowed me to move into a beautiful downtown apartment with mountain views and access to hiking trails that helped me process the emotional aftermath of Carol's betrayal. The legal proceedings against Carol had concluded with justice being served comprehensively. She was convicted on multiple felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and attempted witness tampering. Her sentence of 18 months in federal prison felt appropriate given the scope of her crimes and the damage she had caused to multiple victims. Brandon received a 3-year sentence for drug trafficking and theft charges. The arrest had disrupted a significant criminal network that had been operating throughout the Denver metropolitan area, and law enforcement credited our cooperation with preventing additional crimes and protecting other potential victims. Dad's financial recovery had been complete and swift. The restitution process returned all the money stolen from both of us, plus additional compensation for damages. His business accounts were restored, his credit was repaired, and the fraudulent property transfer attempts were reversed. More importantly, he had enrolled in therapy to understand how he had been manipulated and to develop better recognition skills for future relationships. I spent 5 years walking on eggshells in my own house. Dad told me during one of our weekly dinners at my apartment. I forgot what it felt like to make decisions without worrying about someone's reaction or hidden agenda. Jake had thrived in the months since Carol's departure. His grades improved dramatically. He joined the school's debate team, and he was actively planning for college with Dad's enthusiastic support. The fear and tension that had characterized his home environment were replaced with genuine warmth and open communication. "It's weird how much bigger the house feels now," Jake observed. "Like we can breathe properly again." Our extended family relationships had been completely restored as the truth about Carol's manipulation became known. Aunt Michelle and Uncle Michael were regular visitors again, hosting birthday parties and holiday gatherings that felt authentic and joyful. Uncle David had apologized for believing Carol's lies about Dad's political opinions, and their brotherly relationship was stronger than ever. The most significant change was in Dad's approach to relationships and decision-making. Through therapy, he had gained insight into how his guilt about his previous divorce had made him vulnerable to Carol's manipulation. He was dating again, but this time he was involving Jake and me in getting to know anyone he spent time with. I learned that isolation from family and friends is a red flag, not a sign of special love. Dad explained during one of our conversations about his therapy progress. Healthy relationships bring people together, they don't drive them apart. Jake had also gained wisdom beyond his years from surviving the toxic environment Carol had created. He was more confident in speaking up when he saw injustice, and his experience had motivated him to consider studying law enforcement or social work to help other families in similar situations. "I know what manipulation looks like now," Jake told me. "I'll never let anyone make me feel guilty for telling the truth again." My own personal growth from the experience was profound and lasting. I had learned that being temporarily vulnerable due to job loss and divorce didn't make me weak or dependent. Fighting back against injustice wasn't selfish or aggressive. It was necessary for maintaining authentic relationships and personal integrity. The experience had also taught me that toxic people often exploit kindness and patience, but good people will always choose to support truth over comfortable lies. The family members and friends who stood with me during the crisis were the relationships worth preserving and nurturing. Most importantly, I had discovered that standing up for myself and others wasn't about becoming confrontational or aggressive. It was about refusing to accept manipulation and lies, documenting evidence systematically, and seeking help from qualified professionals who could provide legal and emotional support. Linda Morrison had become not just my attorney, but a mentor who taught me about recognizing manipulation tactics in professional and personal relationships. "People who respect you will want you to verify their claims and ask questions," she had explained. "People who are deceiving you will try to make you feel guilty for seeking truth." The deeper life lesson that emerged from our family's crisis was that authentic love and respect create safety for honesty and questions. When someone tries to isolate you from people who care about you or makes you feel guilty for seeking verification of their claims, those are warning signs that should be taken seriously. Dad's experience taught us that financial and emotional abuse can happen to anyone regardless of age, intelligence, or life experience. Manipulation works by gradually changing what feels normal until victims lose perspective on healthy relationship dynamics. Jake's courage in speaking up despite fear had demonstrated that young people often see truth more clearly than adults who are emotionally invested in maintaining illusions. His example inspired me to always listen seriously when someone expresses concern about potential abuse or manipulation. Our family's commitment to open communication and mutual support had become our protection against future manipulation attempts. We scheduled regular family meetings where everyone could express concerns without judgment, and we had agreed to always investigate claims rather than accepting them without verification. The financial recovery had taught us about the importance of monitoring our own accounts and correspondence regularly. We had implemented systems to prevent anyone from intercepting mail or accessing accounts without proper authorization. But perhaps the most valuable lesson was understanding that family is defined by love, support, and mutual respect, rather than just blood relationships or legal documents. The people who stood with us during our crisis had proved themselves worthy of trust and inclusion in our lives. As I reflected on the transformation from that terrible Christmas dinner to our current happiness and security, I felt grateful for the experience that had led us to authentic relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. Sometimes the worst moments in life become catalysts for the best outcomes when we have courage to seek truth and fight for the people we love. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for creating the kind of relationships and family dynamics that nurture everyone's growth and happiness. The strongest families aren't built on blind loyalty or unquestioning obedience. They're built on honest communication, mutual respect, and the courage to protect each other from people who would exploit kindness for personal gain. Real love doesn't require you to accept abuse, manipulation, or lies. Real love creates safety for truth-telling, question asking, and standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Our family had learned these lessons the hard way, but the wisdom gained had made us stronger, more united, and better equipped to recognize and resist future attempts at manipulation or abuse. As I watched Dad and Jake laugh together during our latest family dinner, I knew that fighting back against Carol's manipulation had been worth every difficult moment. We had saved our family relationships and built something even stronger in the process. The experience had taught me that you never have to accept being treated poorly just to keep peace in a family. Sometimes fighting for truth and justice is the most loving thing you can do for the people who matter most. Have you ever experienced manipulation from a family member or someone close to you? How did you recognize the signs, and what steps did you take to protect yourself and your loved ones? I'd love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. Please like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of standing up for truth in difficult relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine love. Stay strong, keep questioning, and never be afraid to fight for the truth that protects the people you care about most.